It had been 6 cycles since the distress signal had been sent into the vast emptiness of space. 6 cycles since the small Cloran colony, built into what should have been a perfectly safe and quiet planet with no intelligent life, had come under attack by pirates intent of cleaning them out of their resources, leaving 2,000 of the peaceful beings destitute and starving. 6 cycles of screaming children, starvation, sleeplessness, and fear until finally, something came for them. Daq almost wished she could wait a few more cycles. What descended on the panicked crowd was what could only be described as a prop from some horror film no self-respecting viewer would take seriously. It looked to be made primarily of thick, heavy plates of metal bolted together to barely pass through a vacuum-sealed starfaring vessel. It belched fire that threatened, even after it had died out, to sear the fur from their famished bodies. It was a maddening construct of sharp lines and flat planes, and on its side was written 2 things, or more likely one thing in 2 languages. The first was a swoopy sort of thick script that couldn't be read by any of the settlers here now, but the other was a simple script in Galactic Common. TCR Babylon. TCR, Terran Collated Republic. New calling card of a star cluster that was believed to hold no sentient life until recently, where deep in its recesses, nestled against a furious yellow star, was a ball of gravity and suffering that had produced the things of a slasher film director's most fevered dreams. Humans. Even the socially distant Clorans had heard of humans. How they had cowed the Klefna with mere cinema, crushed them as easy as children in a war not even a single tiles long. Giants that had sent the Pelfa, slaving empire, skittering to their holes with a stern look and a thick stick. Vicious murder-obsessed things that made a point to eat anything at least one time, just to prove they could, be it sentient or not. And they were here. What for? Daq couldn't understand. Couldn't comprehend what could possibly have lured the most dominant Deathworld race in the galaxy to this pitiful little barren rock, though perhaps it had been the distress signal. Where other races saw a cry for help, had the humans picked up a signal for a buffet? It didn't seem likely, given the Clever whom the humans had brought under their wing with a single altercation, deemed the Clorans so far beneath notice that they didn't even have a voice in their conglomerate of worlds in spite of how prevalent they were in those worlds. Even the Cheatin have deemed them no threat, so why were they here? While Daq was trying to figure these things out, the metal thing began to settle on the ground in clear view of the refugees. As she watched, a panel on its floor opened up, and what looked at this distance to be an inky blot on the vista emerged. There were several other blots, and as time passed, huge numbers of them emerged. The Cloran settlers didn't flee in the face of this, though. They couldn't. This spot was the only one with atmospheric control enabled, as good as a cage from the moment the pirates had shown. As the crowd neared, Daq saw from her position at the forefront of the settlers what could only be humans. They ran the gamut of shades of brown, the one at the lead nearing solid black, while several behind neared almost comical white. Walking upright on 2 legs, they had 2 more limbs descending down, some of whose were the width of her whole sorry body. She espied with further terror a single member of the titular Klefla species, one reduced to 3 arms instead of 4. The darkest human, arguably the largest as well, locked his roving oculars on hers, and picked up his speed until he was standing, towering before her, and she only barely managed to get herself to look up at him from around the area of his middle. "My name is Captain Darius Flynn. I'm captain of the TCR Babylon. We received your distress signal and came as soon as we could." His voice was a deep timbre that she assumed would be the sound of 2 massive stones grinding together, and he was huge in nearly every part of his body. She picked up a distinct smell, which almost smelled like perfume or burning wood, that seemed to come from him, and his pitch-black oculars, surrounded by white, were lashed onto her like a laser-guided weapon. Turning back the way he came, he gestured generally to the group and the ship behind him. "My crew here is going to help you get on board. With our cargo bay empty, this frigate has space to spare for all of you. We also secured emergency rations on the way, and the nearby platform system has agreed to house you. Do you have any injured?" "You're going to help us?" she asked breathlessly, unsure of her very existence in the shock. "Aye," he nodded, "to the best of our ability." Why say it like it was so natural? How many other races would come out of their way for something like stranded Clorans? How many Deathworlders would even take note of them? I am Daq, formerly the settlement's chiefess, and I speak for my people." Her relatively minor training as a diplomat took over and helped her muddle through her confusion. "We have few injured, but we have not eaten in many cycles. The young are susceptible to starve." The human, Captain Darius, lowered himself so they could speak at a closer level. almost as one would to an equal. Holding her gaze, the captain said firmly, "Not on my watch they won't." Standing back up, he gestured behind him, and a Chi-Tin emerged from his massive shadow. "Greetings, Chiefess," it said in his chittering voice, highly welcome compared to the buffeting sound of the human. "I am Frastillian Tuk, the ship's operator. I will be your liaison during the evacuation, and I am authorized to work with certain items on your behalf within reason." "A waste if ever there was one," scoffed the Clefener, even as they picked up 3 of her people like luggage in her massively strong arms. "I do not know when we must divert for the sake of these rodents." "Kissy, our employment contracts include clauses regarding aid. All human vessels operating legally are required to provide humanitarian support in times of need. The captain's hands are bound." "Make no mistake, Fruss," came that roiling voice again. "We be here to help, clause or no clause, and anyone who doesn't agree can stay here." He aimed a hard glare at the Clefener, and she withered instantly, scurrying off to deliver her squirming payload. But Daq still couldn't grasp what was happening. Why? The captain only looked at her and sighed, leaving the question unanswered until another, paler human spoke up, lifting an injured refugee bed and all. "We're Marines, ma'am. First in, always." "I'm afraid we cannot do very much for your people in the way of privacy," said Fruss. "This space was designed to hold interplanetary freight. Its size is the only reason you can fit, but that also means there will be no walls. That said, while you may not wander the ship randomly on the captain's orders, the human defecation chairs are available for your use should you need to relieve yourselves, and there will be several crewmates assigned at any time to help you and your people." Daq smiled warily, but grateful at the Chi-Tin, her own 2 little ones squirming under her forelimbs. It was incredible how fast a couple squirts of the nutritional paste they'd been provided could take the children from near death to wiggling ragamuffins. "Thank you dearly, Fruss, and I will ask my people to do their very best not to be a bother to the crew. I'm afraid I have no control of the wiles of toddlers." She raised the wiggling fanny of her youngest as he tried to escape. He chuckled good-naturedly. "Do any? Be well, Daq, and stay safe." He gave a small bow and retired to his quarters, carefully avoiding the piles of resting bodies laying about. Daq and her people, following the near full cycle required to get them boarded, treated, and gratefully fed, had been led into what would be their communal quarters for the duration of the trip. It was not dissimilar from the outside of the vessel, though notably cleaner, thankfully. In so much as it was a massive space of metal plates riveted and welded together, it would have to be a show of stubbornness towards a galaxy that primarily used various forms of silicates and superplastics. No as in what could only be described as a giant cage, being guarded by the predators who owned it. Daq could not help but feel jittery and uneasy, in spite of her rescue. This was a sentiment apparently shared by many. Everywhere she looked, there were the sparkles of open eyes, marking her passage and warily eyeing the human guardians that had shown them such confusing kindness, too terrified of the rescuers to sleep, in spite of their overwhelming exhaustion. They had all heard the stories, of course, and having seen the things in person did nothing to assuage fears. The captain and his human crew could lift entire families over their heads with ease. It wasn't hard to imagine those same life-saving limbs squeezing the guts from them like prey. It didn't help that this place was so unbearably hot. Clon gravitated to cold, and this storage facility was kept at a sweltering temperature, which, according to Fruss, had been actually lowered to its limiter to allow for them. "Mama," came an insistence under her arm. "Hot," cooed her oldest, Clee, which her youngest, Flo, was quick to mimic. Daq bit back any attempts to scold them. She'd come so near to losing them, perhaps she was afraid any harsh words would be her last to her offspring. "I know, lovies, I know." Trying to comfort them, she bounced them a bit, but to no avail. For every adjustment resulted in a rump being pointed at her somehow. "But we need to sleep now. Please. Please try to bear it for a little while." "But hot." I know." Daq, having reached her spot in the area, laid her children down and swaddled them in their blankets to keep them from escaping, and slowly eased herself down beside to try and, maybe, get a bit of rest. It proved for naught, though. Her dreams were filled with brawny brown skin and crushing white teeth. She saw her babies fall down the gullet of Captain Darius, although he told her he was here to help. Scream as she liked, no sound would come. She ran to the Clefener army that appeared behind her, only for them to cower and whimper, humans emerging in their ranks to rip off the arms of any who got in the way of their meal. Weep and quiver. That was all she could do as Captain Darius swallowed Clee, as he swallowed Flo, as he reached down for her, picked her up, and hung her over his gaping maw. Then he swallowed. "Daq!" Ripped from her fever dream, sweating for more than just the horrid heat, Daq found herself snap to snap with Brun, one of the other Chloromothers. "Brun? What in the world is... Where are the children? She asked, not demanding an answer so much as begging for one. Her heart sinking, Daq came to a full panic consciousness as she whipped about, finding a pair of empty swaddling blankets in the spot where there should have been children. You haven't seen them either? What? What did the guards say? How in the galaxy am I supposed to talk to those monsters? For all we know, they're the ones who took them. Daq had to find every instinct that was telling her to agree, fight for an argument. There are many things. Silence is not one. Do you mean to tell me they strutted in here and abducted our little ones without a single eye spot in one? Brun fell silent, unsure of how to respond. How could she? She had been among those assigned to secretly watch the Watchers. The humans seemed to gather the intent behind having so many eyes on them. Bah, fine, I'll go ask. Daq leapt up and made a beeline for the nearest human guard. Tall like all the others, he had pale yellow hair and gemstone-like green eyes. Human, sir? She asked. Ma'am, he answered quickly, and from his tone she could tell he knew something was amiss, but had hesitated to simply put himself in the midst of it. Is something wrong? Yes. Several of our young have disappeared, she said gravely. Have you seen them? I'm sorry, but no. You all are pretty small by our standards, so I'm ashamed to say they may have slipped by. He bowed his head in seeming shame, then lowered himself so he could speak to her better, just like the captain had done previously. I'll call up to the COB, let them know we got some little ones out and about on the ship. We'll have all hands on search duty, promise. Oh, thank you very much, but... She was hesitant to send a horde of super predators after hers and others' children. Who knew what could happen? The humans seemed to gather this, then made another suggestion. I guess having a bunch of strangers stomping around might be less productive than we might hope. If I'll tell everyone to keep an eye out, then give you permission to go after them yourself, would that work? He asked. Oh my, yes. Thank you so much. The human's mouth curled up in some sort of show, and he said, No problem, ma'am. The skipper's responsible for anyone who steps on the boat, and that includes refugees. He returned to the standing position, and retreated to the guard post that had been established, presumably to make the call he promised. Daq likewise retreated, rejoining her brothers and sisters in worry to tell them what had been agreed upon. Just you? Asked one of the mothers. No, I don't think so, but let's keep search parties as small as possible. Best case scenario, the children are just restless after being on that sorry rough for so long. If we show up en masse, we may just scare them off. A chorus of nods, and Daq started divvying out teams of 3. Ma'am, I've got permission from COB. You and yours can search the ship, but if you need access to anything, you need to ask a crew member. Skipper had returned from his call, smoothly entering her circle, and being frighteningly quiet about it. She couldn't help but notice just how many advantages does a race need? COB says they may have gone through the vents and access panels, but there's no way they'd be able to get very far that way. They have to have exited somewhere nearby. Do you have any idea what they might be up to? I might, offered a mother, and Daq thought she knew where she might have been going. My girls were complaining about the heat. They may have gone in search of somewhere cooler. Nearly all the parents nodded in agreement, Daq included. Skipper brought a hand to his chin and nodded thoughtfully. Alright, then narrows it down. Forwards there will be the captain's mess and coolant drums. Afterwards there's the crew mess, water chillers and Janice's pub. Get a team for each and I'll let them know you're on your way. Daq thanked him profusely and set the teams down their paths, herself heading afterwards with Brun and Han. Skipper led the way to their first location, the so-called crew mess. With a loud thumping on the metal door, utilising strength that would likely crush any one of the mothers present to even half of itself, Skipper called out to another human. Cod, you in there? Come on, Cod. I know your ass ain't asleep, open the damn door. From the other side of the metal barrier, Daq heard the huffing and hawing of the other human as they tried to answer the call. With another thump and a round of cussing, the titular Cod opened the door. This human was shorter than Skipper, with hair down their back and a softer appearance overall. This one had a narrower chin and no facial hair like many of the others had, leading Daq to believe this was a rare example of a human female. As a matter of fact, she seemed rather attracted to Daq, or at least would have, were it not for the obvious scar that marred her face, changing its colour from a reddish pocked brown to angry pink along her mouth. Cod didn't seem to be terribly happy about the awakening either. Lance, you prick! Do you realise you almost made me drop an entire box of salt into my soup? You gonna eat it if I did? No time for the usual back and forth, Cod, so let's skip the schmoozing and get to the sweet nothings. Skipper's response was quick and terse, seeming to clue Cod into the seriousness of the situation. These little lazies here are out a gaggle of kids. He gestured down to Daq and her company, to which Cod gave a surprised chump, and think they may have been looking for somewhere to cool off. I need you to show them the fridge and freezer. Huh? No way, no how, declared Cod, to the sinking fear of the Coral mothers. They don't even make nets with that much hair. You expect me to brush every hunk of meat I take out from now on? No buts, Cod, refuted Skipper. You'll open the door for them. You don't have to let them in, necessarily. Just make sure nothing snuck in while you were focused on your salt. Cod rubbed the back of her head, signing exasperation, mulling it over for a painful amount of time. Yeah, Lance, alright, I'll show them in. Cod looked down to Daq and her posse, and jerked her head into the room, making way for them to file in. As they went inside, Skipper said his farewells and returned to his duty guarding the group, and Cod took up point and led them further inside. Did you hear that? Whispered Bryn. Salt! She was poisoning the food the whole crew eats, and says it like it's nothing. What if the children got into something like that? I'm more worried about the other thing, muttered Han. Perhaps sensing their discomfort, Cod made an effort to put them at ease, though was clearly lacking the skill for it. Sorry about earlier, saying you can't come in at all. Wasn't that I don't want you to find them, it's just cleanliness is a big part of my job, and you look like mice, so... What's a mice? Asked Han. Animal from Earth, you just look like them, just a few shades bigger and a few more shades better dressed. Oh, and what role do these creatures serve on Earth? None really, just vermin. Oops. Realising too late that she compared 3 intelligent beings to the sort of creature to be exterminated on sight, Cod turned to apologise, but you'd find all 3 rooted in place, and Han and Brune carrying behind Daq. I didn't mean you were ones, she hardly explained. Just that you look kind of similar. You can talk and wear clothes and such. So you got nothing to worry about from me, swear. Except you just admitted that we look like something you normally wouldn't hesitate to murder. What a terrifying race. It's fine, I think. Can we just find the children? Daq eked out. Far sight better than letting me talk, tell you what, grumbled Cod. She continued to lead them in, and behind the large metal counter, and into what looked like the most secure vault a bank could buy. My word, I thought this place a kitchen, exclaimed Brun. What valuables could you possibly warrant such a door? And what sort of punishment would sneaky children who found their way inside get? Daq added in secret. Cod, though, bared her teeth, not noticing the flinch of terror that ran through her guests. Ladies, you're on a naval vessel. What's in this room is more valuable here than any gold, jewel, or Playboy magazine in the universe. Without further ado, Cod yanked the door open, clearly utilising the whole of her body to swing the massive lump of metal into position that would allow them to pass. All 3 were hit with a blast of air so cold it stood in shock at their previous toastiness, the very air turning to white vapour in the sharp contrast. Within was the treasure in question, tubs of colourful stuff that looked to weigh roughly the same as Daq herself. Ice cream, finished Cod. The 3 guests stood in awe of the room, relatively small, packed to the ceiling with what had been described to them as the greatest treasure humanity had for its shipping vessels. Eyes wide, they basked in the unexpected cold and the unexpected honour. Yeah, said Cod, rubbing a manipulating digit under her ocular. I get like that when I see it too. After a moment for herself to appreciate as well, Cod stepped in front of the group. You all wait here, I'll check about. She made to turn around and enter the room, but stopped herself with a realisation. Actually, while I'm in there, you'll check around out here. I don't see how something so little could get inside, but the wall and door are pretty chilly themselves, so they may have snuggled up out here. Her piece said, Cod entered the chamber, while Daq, Han and Brun did as suggested, and checked the perimeter. After a few short moments, Here! Cried Brun, prompting Daq and Han to come running. There, nestled in a bundle behind some boxes, braced against the wall in a pile, were 5 of the missing children. You find them? Asked Cod, running back out with swift thumping steps. Unfortunately, the yelling and heavy footsteps of the human alerted the children, all of them awakened at once to gawk at her. Cod had made it closer than Daq had, and from the opposite side, so Daq got a perfect view of Cod glancing down to the children, only to watch him wonder as the human froze in place, staring at the children, and her skin turning visibly pale. That little sound was all it took for the children. Like little hellions they were, all 5 bolted, trying to get away from their mothers so hard they managed to rush straight for poor Cod. Cod, for her part, went ramrod straight, then, trying to backpedal away from the children, tripped and fell flat on her rump. Han and Brun, though, had no such issues. Last one to stand before me gets a whipping like they'd never believe, Brun yelled, as loud as she could, and Han pulled a switch out of nowhere and swished it about, eliciting a terrible noise in its wake. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like the mice they so resembled, several of the children scurried over and stood obediently before their mothers, heads down and shivering in fear. Daq, noting with anxiety that this wasn't anywhere close to all of them, and that neither of her own were present, went to Cod, who hadn't moved from where she fell, and was still white as a sheet. Are you okay, dear? Asked Daq. Fine, just... God! Well, I've been back in New York. Daq, unsure what to do, simply reached out and patted the giant on her now reachable shoulder. Just then, Ah! A high-pitched scream cried out from the cold storage box that Cod had left open behind her, repeating every few breaths. Daq and Brun bolted while Han stayed with the captured children. Delac could hear the human getting up behind her, even as she scurried to the source of the screaming. Into the comfortably frigid box, past the towering sacred ice cream, and into a side corridor she hadn't been able to see from the outside, Delac pursued the sounds of the wailing child. Catching sight of the little girl, she leapt in and covered her with herself, covering her eyes and pressing her to her breast to protect the poor thing from whatever had terrified her so, only to look up and wish someone would do the same for her. "Fucking meat locker," came the grumble of resignation somewhere to the rear. Hanging all around her, suspended from hooks and torn, bare of skin and guts, were rows and rows of carcasses and severed limbs. Their macabre swaying caused by all the rushing about seemed to indicate a lingering sense of life to the things. In gistering fear, Delac turned her head to her rear, to Cod. Cod, a difficult expression on her face, had blocked Broom from entering, and seeing the terrible scene there for herself. Her breath crystallizing in the air, Cod stepped in after Delac and the child, still whimpering in her arms. That's right. Cod was a human. A predator. The most dominant predator on the planet for all of them. A being so inherently powerful that even its weakest member had earned the title Death Race almost as soon as they'd been discovered. Delac had nowhere she could run from this being, this thing. Nowhere that would protect her and the child in her arms from its merest whim. Cod came over them then, her long limbs seeming like the bars of a cage, and she bent down to unwrap them. Delac did the only thing she could think of. As soon as one of the limbs entered her field of vision, she snapped out with her teeth and bit it. There was a jerk as Cod attempted to remove her limb for a moment, the brief strength of which threatened to snap Delac's neck as she refused to let go, only for the withdrawal to cease. In her teeth, Delac could feel the power flowing through the woman. Delac had barely broken skin, the corded, hardened muscles repelling her completely, and she could feel every twitch Cod made threaten to rip her teeth out. Cod knelt down and began stroking Delac's cranial fur, the slow, smooth stroke somehow comforting. Delac didn't let go of her bite, but she did let go with her restraint, and began to cry in confusion and fear. Amidst this confusion, Cod knelt down and with her other arm scooped up Delac and her charge at one single go, holding them like Delac might one of her children. She extracted her arm from Delac's mouth and, still making sure Brun didn't see either, exited the meat locker, then the freezer altogether. It took a few moments for Delac to finally calm down, during which she allowed herself to be held by the most powerful being she'd ever known, from whom this fear had sprouted. "You gotta understand," humans whispered. "Humans gotta eat meat. Can't survive elsewise. There was a point where we tried as many alternatives as we could think of, but biology can't be beat. But please remember, we ain't monsters either. We're thinking just like you, and wouldn't dream of eating anything that thinks, feels, or talks. Them's just rations from our home planet. We ain't mean you no harm, and every single one of you is going to make it to payful, if I got anything to say on the matter." "Just like Captain Darius, but why? Something like that is the norm for them, so why should it matter where the meat they need comes from?" "Sorry," whispered Delac. Sorry. It took nearly a half hour for both Delac and the girl to calm down, during which Cod bandaged her arm. Delac made it clear she would accept any consequence for the injury, but Cod said it was no issue, and she didn't blame her. It took some time to explain the concept of animal farming and cold storage, but both Delac and the girl eventually were made to understand that none of them or their families would ever be in danger of being hung up on those hooks. Brun and Han gathered up the children and returned to the group. Delac insisted on continuing on to find any more. "Good news, there won't be any more meat lockers for you or them to stumble into," Cod said after it was decided she would take Delac to her next location. "Bad news, not even Lance can get you into the water coolers. It's a control room and only designated personnel can get inside." Delac felt herself droop at this bit of information. "Sorry, but we gotta leave that one to the boys, though it's really unlikely any of them squirts of yours got in there. I'll get you to Janice, though I can't really help past that. Got a crew of about 150 to feed on tomorrow's shift, and I'm behind as it is." Delac expressed her understanding and allowed herself to be led to the place in question. It was a fair ways further into the ship, down and then up several flights of stairs, and they even found one or two children napping under AC units on the way, but eventually they made it to what Skipper had called Genesis' pub. Cod knocked on the door and bade her farewells, departing just in time for the automatic door to open. "Come in," said another human voice. Following the sound, wary of any shocks like the one she'd received spending time with Cod, Delac made her way inside, immediately shocked by the chilliness of the room. As she entered, the first thing she saw was the children. Indeed, the remaining 20 or so missing children of every age were sleeping soundly in the room, splayed about on tables, counters and chairs. And at the far end there was another human, though this one was different than the rest. Whereas every other human Delac had met had been brimming with strength and vitality, the female seated across from her seemed diminished somehow. Her hair was pale and faded into grey. Her skin seemed pallid and hung loosely in spots. The only thing that Delac could be sure was the same with the eyes. Every human she met so far had a sort of inner strength that radiated from within through their eyes. The corners of her mouth pulled into the same one Skipper had made before. "Welcome, dearie. I've been expecting you for some time now." Shocked out of her staring, Daq quickly introduced herself. "Ah, so you are little Cleo Flo's mother, are you?" she asked, and the names of her children made her realise that the rascals in question were lounging comfortably on the woman's lap. Immediately embarrassed, Daq began apologising and rushing to take them from her. "Oh, it's no trouble, really. I've had several little ones of my own over the years, so I know the terror of a toddler in a fit." "Even still," Daq couldn't help but worry. Even this frail example of humanity could have crushed her children at any time, and there would have been nothing anyone could do to stop it. Accepting the girls from the woman, Daq breathed a sigh of relief as soon as her babes were back in her arms. "My, that trying, was it?" asked the woman. Janice, apparently. "Yes, for many reasons." One can't help but picture the worst when their child is in the custody of a monster, after all." Alarmed she'd let her inner feelings show, Daq made to apologise and hopefully correct her, but Janice was apparently not offended in the least. "Oh, no need to apologise. You're right, after all, about us." Shocked at the admission, Daq readied herself to flee. "Now, don't get me wrong, I'd never eat you, nor would I suffer harm to come to any of these little dearies, precious as they are. But we are predators, vicious Deathworlders through and through." I don't understand." Well, a predator isn't necessarily a wild beast, is it? Humans are creatures of strength and violence, and we're admittedly quick to anger, but no being in the universe can say ordinary all the time, yes? I think what you've allowed yourself to get hung up in is what we can do, not what we would do. Tell me, have any of the human crew members threatened you? Have they made any attempt to harm you?" "No, as a matter of fact." Daq had to admit the humans were the most gentle, kind and accommodating people she'd ever interacted with. "That would be a matter of humanity," Janice offered. "Please remember, everyone on this ship is human, excepting some of our Xeno associates, but we don't define our humanity by our physical capabilities. There are deformed and crippled humans with as much right to the title as our hale and hearty captain. What we can do, the violence we are capable of, is what qualifies us as vicious Deathworld things, but we define our humanity by the choices we make. For instance..." She reached down and gently rubbed the head of a sleeping child, coaxing back to slumber as if threatened to awake due to their conversation. Smiling at the young one, she stood and nimbly stepped over them to get an object from the back of the room. A large padded cart. What it could be used for, Daq couldn't guess, but she also could be happier to see it. As she began piling the children into it comfortably, with Daq's help, she continued on. "There is not a man or woman on this ship that will hesitate to offer their life for that of your children, myself included. It is a similar thing that drove this frigate to abandon its cargo and pick all of you up, in spite of the loss to profit. Humanity is something we demand of each other, not something all of us are necessarily born with." With the last child secured in the cart, Janice began pushing the ridiculous trolley out the door and into the hallway. "The children, by the way, were very vocal about all this. That's why I thought it important to discuss with you." "Of course they were." As they made their way back down the hallway, picking up kids and adding them to the litter as they went, Daq and Janice continued to speak, more comfortably and openly than they had at the beginning. Janice explained that the reason so many kids wound up with her was because her room was a research centre. It was temperature controlled and maintained at a very chilly temperature for the sake of the volatile chemicals she needed to work with, in her attempts to adapt human biological defence mechanisms to xeno diseases and environments. She found the children wandering about aimlessly, and she recognised the signs of heat exhaustion, so she piled them up and rushed them to the room for their health. For her part, Daq discussed some of what her people had been through, and Janice likened them to a culture from Earth known as gypsies, wanderers with poor reputations but a strong culture. She said that most humans would likely like them quite well, as a matter of fact, and suggested her people seek a partnership. Daq was surprised to learn that not only was Skipper Cod's husband, but Cod was also Janice's daughter, and that she had a little girl of her own somewhere on the ship. Daq sighed. "I'm very sorry about all this. To think so many would find their way to you." Janice smiled gently and continued to speak. "Oh, it's fine. We aren't particularly well equipped, and my work is at a standstill anyway, so if anyone needs a break, do feel free to bring them by. As a matter of fact, I'll talk to the captain about having my room serve as a nursery for the duration of your stay." Having finally arrived at the storage room housing her people, Daq had the parents come over and collect their kids so Janice could return to her room and get some sleep herself. Before leaving, though, she offered one last word of advice. "It might help you if you don't think of yourself being trapped by Deathworlders, but in the protection of humans, if it helps." Daq sighed. Her stress and fear had finally gone for the first time since she'd woken up that morning 6. No. It was past 7 cycles now, wasn't it? "Yes, I think it does. Thank you for everything." So that's what it was, Daq thought, as she carried her kids back to their blankets, laying down for what was sure to be a restful sleep. That's what I didn't get. It's what the captain was talking about, and why they all treat us so well. They're not just Deathworld things. They're humans.